I'd like to welcome our audience to Season 1, Episode 8 of the Wide Open Podcast. My name is Bruce Huberman. My co-host is Paul Asiante. Our executive producer and sound engineer is James Pavelko. And our social media director is Marilee Fuentes. We are happy to be back after a short hiatus. Getting back to our squash roots, I just want to shout out to Diego Ilias, the first South American to win the World Open, and Nouran Gohar, a top-ranked Egyptian, for winning the World Championships this past week in Egypt. Also, a big shout-out to the Rangers for making the Eastern Conference Final. And good luck to the Knicks. Game 7, Sunday at Madison Square Garden. Today, we are really fortunate to have our guest, Matthew Futterman, an acclaimed sports writer, now is a staff reporter for The Atlantic, focusing on tennis and the upcoming Olympics. He's been in the business for about 25 years with the Star-Ledger, Wall Street Journal, New York Times. And if you weren't aware, The Atlantic is an arm of the New York Times. So without any further introduction, welcome Matt to the podcast. So why don't you just give us a little, background, like sort of where you grew up and how you got started in journalism, and did your parents have an influence on that, or was this something that just came to you, or you found it interesting? And then I love the way you segued into sports. So tell us how that all began and, how it is today. It's really it's changed. I think the demographics and the way, journalism is presented has really changed over the years. And I think you've seen a lot of that. And so give us an update.
Yeah, so I grew up in Larchmont, New York, in Westchester County, about 20 miles northeast of New York City. Pretty ideal childhood existence, kind of the perfect place to grow up, and had, a really pretty great childhood. In terms of my parents' influence, I mean, neither of them are writers. My dad's a lawyer. My mother's a therapist. But it's funny because recently I brought one of my daughters on a visit, his last year on a visit to Cornell, when she was looking at colleges. And, my dad said to me, I haven't been there, since the last time I was there was the fall of 1960, when I was at Columbia and, writing for the Columbia Daily Spectator, and went to cover the Cornell-Columbia game up there. And I said, you were a sports writer for the Daily Spectator at Columbia? And he's like, oh, sure. And I was like, well, that would have been kind of interesting information for me to have before I got to be 54 years old, or 50, whatever I was at the time. I had, so I guess maybe it was in my blood a little bit. But I think, largely the big influence is just sort of, I grew up in a household that was just, filled with books and, staffed by parents who said, figure out what you love to do and figure out what you're good at. And if you're lucky, they'll be the same thing, and do your best at it. So in terms of journalism, I guess, when I was a little kid, I watched a lot of the show The Odd Couple, and certainly was I'm really dating myself here, and certainly, gravitated towards the Oscar Madison character, who was a sports writer in New York. And then as I got a little older and in college, I thought I wanted to be a fiction writer. I tried that for a little bit, went to a creative writing program at the University of Arkansas out of college, ended up dropping out because I hadn't lived enough. I didn't have anything to write about, and worked in publishing for a couple of years, and just decided at that point that I didn't want to spend my life behind a desk, that I wanted to be sort of out and about in the world. And being a journalist is a pretty good thing to do if you can't sit still and you want to be out and about in the world, and being a sports writer is an even better thing to do. I would argue the best form of journalism to do if you can't sit still and want to be out in the world. And it's sort of all evolved from there. I spent about 5 years in news, and then gravitated towards sports when I was at the Star Ledger, and have been a sports writer for going on 25 years at this point.
Wow. So just before I let Paul, come on in. Yeah, so my son's graduating, Cordell. I was just going to say, now there's a spot open now. He's graduating next weekend. So I thought that was, did your daughter like it up there?
She loved it. Yeah, she actually got in, but isn't going there. So she had some good choices, and but nothing against Cornell. Wonderful place. I probably would, I might have gone there. I had a lot of good weekends there when I was in college. So,
What led you from Larchmont, New York to Union College? Why did you go in that direction?
I for some reason I grew up always thinking I was going to go to Michigan, and I just I love the helmet. I love the football team. I was kind of obsessed with Michigan. And I was the first kid in my senior class to get into college. I got into college on October 1st of my senior year, because that was back when Michigan had really early rolling admission. Mm-hmm. And I was sure I was going to go there. And then I went to visit it. I'd never seen it before. I went to visit it, and I was like, wow, this is actually a really, really big place. And my oldest brother went to Williams. My middle brother was at Columbia, and I didn't have the grades to get into those places, but I decided to apply to a bunch of small schools, and ultimately was deciding between Union and Michigan, sort of the two opposite ends of the spectrum in many ways, and decided to sort of take the safe route and go be coddled at a small private school in upstate New York, which I at times have regretted, but ultimately when I got to the Wall Street Journal sports department was basically entirely Michigan graduates, and so around the same age as me. And so what I told myself, well, if I got into Michigan, I would have ended up in the same place anyway, because I would have just been working with these guys. So When
did your brother graduate from Williams? I coached up there.
Oh, he 1987.
Wow, I just missed him.
Oh, yeah.
Well, and where did your daughter end up going?
She's my youngest daughter. She's going to be going to Duke in the fall.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. So I'm a consultant for UNC tennis. And ironically, my neighbor at West Point was Mike Krzyzewski.
Okay.
And so Coach K and he actually was involved in the book that I wrote. And so that's super cool. She'll love it down there.
I hope so.
Tobacco Road.
Yeah, I hope so.
So why tennis? Is that your central interest, or you sports generally?
Well, I was a tennis head as a kid. Larchmont was a big tennis town, and still is. Every year pretty much, Mamaroneck High School and Scarsdale High School are 1 and 2 in New York State. And I'll give you an idea of how good a tennis town it is. I wasn't good enough to make my high school team, but I played college tennis. So, right. Because pretty much everyone on that team in high school played Division I or very, very high Division III.
Right.
There was just no way. So I sort of grew up, and I grew up in sort of the heart of late 70s, early 80s, Jimmy Connors, John McEnroe, Chris Evert, Martina. Tennis was huge. Tennis was as big as it got. As big as it got. These people were were rock stars, and it was sort of the big boom, and I was just completely drawn to it. My parents took me to the U.S. Open when the first year that the National Tennis Center opened. I remember it very distinctly, watching Roscoe Tanner play that year. And, so I just sort of gravitated towards the sport. In terms of why, I think probably some level of masochism, because it really is, it really is torture, and I was tortured by it, playing. And in terms of writing, torture makes for good material.
Yeah.
And the sort of mental torture and the duel. And I remember the first time someone said to me that, people write about tennis like it's art and ballet, and it's not, it's boxing. And I remember the first time someone said that to me, and I thought, yeah, that's what it feels like, because when you're losing a tennis match, it kind of feels like you're getting beat up, and you're just alone, and it's that duel.
You spent some time at the Star Ledger.
Yeah.
I went to Columbia High School with South Orange Maplewood, and I played tennis, and I played tennis in college, Division III, nothing great. But I guess it was Al Picker. Did you know Al Picker?
I sort of knew of him. The Star Ledger had a weird sort of bureaucratic setup where there was a separate, like, local sports company, which was owned and run by the legendary columnist Sid Dorfman.
Right.
It was called, like, Dorf's Feature Service. And so Al worked for Dorf's. Al was actually a Dorf's employee. I was a Star Ledger employee, and we didn't really cross paths all that much. Every once in a while, if I wasn't covering tennis all that much when I was at the Star Ledger. I think I saw him once or twice at the U.S. Open or something like that. But no, I was not. I was not familiar with him, but I knew his writing.
Yeah, as a high school athlete, I mean, he really wrote. I mean, every week he was writing articles about tennis and high school tennis and everything like that. So and I think he had a son that played for Union High School, if I remember correctly.
Right.
Yeah, I just
lots of Gimmel Staub stories.
Oh yeah, I know. Actually, I have a Gimbelstaub story. I might as well tell you. I did Golden Set Justin Gimbelstaub at the Chatham Country Club, Chatham Tennis Club back in the day. I was in college, and he was this young little guy, and we played, and I think I got a golden set off of him. I mean, which was like very rare.
He was four. He was four at the time, but
right. I mean, that was still okay.
Take your victories as you will.
I will.
Yeah, that's hysterical. When I was a pro in Rye at the Appomattox Club, and we had a world team tennis match in Mamaroneck, and it was John and Patrick McEnroe were on that team, and it was a fun night because those two guys, they made it. We had Luke and Murphy Jensen, and you had Patrick and John, and that was just a 3-ring circus.
Right. Well, if you were a pro in Rye, you'd know, familiar with the Rye Racket Club, which is where I grew up. This is where I grew up having lessons, and I mean, it's quite a. I remember the year that Melissa Brown, who I had grown up playing, on the next court, taking lessons on the next court from, and sometimes, she'd wander over to hit onto our court, or we'd wander over onto hers, and then the next thing you know, she's going to the 4th round of the French Open. The guys who went to Stanford, Scott Moody was there. He went to Stanford, played with Patrick. Billy Stanley was a guy from Rye. I think he played at Harvard, something like that. All these. So it was a pretty, this was sort of, the Florida academies hadn't really happened yet. And, in a weird way, the center, one of the centers of the tennis universe was this sort of Westchester, Long Island.
Port Washington and Westchester.
So that was, it all felt very close and very familiar. And like you said, you had a world team tennis match in Mamaroneck, of all places. And,
amazing.
So it's pretty easy to have an affinity for it.
Are you more interested today with like the players and the stories, or do you think it was it was better back in the day with McEnroe and Borg and Connors, or is it more intriguing to you today with, obviously Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic? I mean, I guess Djokovic has a little bit more time left, if so. And is it more appealing to you today, or is it just totally different?
I'm sure it's totally different. It was completely appealing then, and it's completely appealing now in a different sort of way. I think probably that the players were a little more approachable then. But I don't know. I mean, the players are pretty approachable now, given the stature of where they are. I mean, like you as a journalist, it's not like I'm having dinner with Djokovic all that often. But if you consider that he's on a sort of Michael Jordan level, I've had a lot of contact with him, in a very sort of close and at times one-on-one way. And, and so it's different than covering the NFL, and that's appealing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's incredible the impact Billie Jean has had on that sport and the world team tennis piece of it and the format that she created. And it was so user friendly, and it extended the career for a lot of the guys and gals out there who could continue playing rather than just playing master tennis. And have you had any time with Billie Jean? Because she blows me away every time I talk to her.
Yeah, I have. She's a live wire and a big thinker. And I think she has big ideas about equality, and I think what I think is what you would like to see more of is that what you do see in world team tennis is just men and women playing on the same team together.
Yeah.
Because they seem to really enjoy it. They do it at the United Cup in Australia, and it seems to be a good atmosphere, and I think it helps them both. It helps both the men and the women in different ways.
Yeah, they love it. It's super fun. When we had the little drama a couple of years ago, when McEnroe made some comments about whether the women and the men could play against each other, and of course people wanted to seize on to that. And I thought it was very cool that when Serena came out and said, look, if I played Andy Murray tomorrow, he'd beat me 0-0. I mean, you people don't understand the difference, and it is interesting. I've been around enough of those players to know that they can rally with you. The both genders can rally all day long. But if a male, because of just the physical differences, steps in and takes a ball earlier and makes things happen a little more quickly, the difference becomes more apparent.
Yeah, and who cares? Okay, next, it's just sort of, it's the way it is. I mean, but it doesn't mean there isn't great competition
No, it's the best.
And at the same time, at the United Cup in January, late December, whenever it was, when the U.S. was playing Britain and Taylor Fritz is serving into Katie Boulter, he was cranking the serve at 130 miles an hour, and she had it measured and was getting it back. And so maybe so they're even enough that they can play mixed doubles. So
and very often it's the male whose serve gets broken.
Oh yeah. So it's I mean, like I said, Usain Bolt would beat any woman in the 100 meters by a lot too. But okay, yes, who cares?
It's
so
great.
What?
I just saw Usain Bolt. He's over in the U.S. now promoting cricket. I guess there's a big cricket, facility out on, maybe it's out on the Long Island, and he was there to promote that. So in terms of the landscape today, I think the Americans are doing pretty well relatively to, the last 10 years. The Fritzes, the Tiafos, Shelton. On the men's side, you got Coco Gauff and Padilla on the women's side. What is your feeling about that? Are we on the rise, or is this a blip, or do you think we can maintain this, or have things changed in terms of, U.S. tennis and, putting the dollars to keep, the U.S. players, up there?
I think there's clearly more depth than there has been in a while. The question, especially on the men's side, is if you're going to have a unicorn, and you just never know. Like, that's something that you can't really plan for. And, all you can have is all you can really has is a big trout farm, and see what emerges from that. But, having said that, I do think there are certain things that, like, the U.S. does really well, especially, and I would say especially in terms of providing opportunity for kids to play tennis. I mean, it's funny to me that, like, Great Britain, it's always racking its brains of, why can't we produce more? We're the home of Wimbledon, and why can't we do this? And they basically never produce a black tennis player, and there's a huge black population in Britain, and it's just they don't provide the opportunities in communities that have less means that we do here, and I think that's something that we do really well. And you just look around, like, it's not perfect, but if you're a good athlete and you, like, somehow choose tennis at a pretty early age, even if you're in New York City, like, someone's going to find you, and someone's going to nurture you in some way. It seems like there are, like, you'll have to seek it out. But if you have the right parents who are willing to do that, and, there are opportunities there, and you see it in lots of different places, and, it's a very varied background. You look at all these, you rattled off some names of players. Jessica Pegula, her father's an NFL owner. But Francis Tiafoe's father was the maintenance guy in the tennis club, and Coco Gauff is solidly middle class upbringing. But parents were very committed to tennis and sports, and it really is like a very, very broad spectrum of people. And so I think that's something that this country does well, and probably doesn't get enough credit for. We are the only diversity in the professional sport for the most part. France brings some. But if you're talking about diversity in terms of, certainly black players, obviously Latin America has some great players as well, Brazil, Argentina. But we bring a tremendous amount of diversity.
Yeah, that is, and to have the Williams sisters, playing in a tournament as the 1 and 2 ranked players in the world at one point, that was just an amazing story.
Yeah, just two girls from Compton. Just the fact that there were tennis courts there, and I think, the opportunities are available. Billie Jean King saw them when they were really young. I think met them when they were 8 and 10 or something like that. And right. That just sort of, I think, speaks to what is out there.
It's interesting that they, I think it was Arthur Ashe who found Yannick Noah.
Yeah, on a trip to Cameroon. Yeah,
that was a crazy story, and The other thing, we're seeing a really big surge in international kids coming over to play in the colleges now.
Yeah.
And the college tennis game has really, I think, taken a huge pop.
Sure. Yeah. And I think right now it's really seen as a viable path to the pros where it wasn't seen that way.
Yeah.
I heard Andy Roddick talking the other day and saying that, like, when he was playing, he was pretty sure that no one in college was going to end up being, higher than 70 or 80 or something like that. But now you have, Shelton and Cam Norrie and Danielle Collins is as good as anyone in the world right now. And Emma Navarro is, just out of the University of Virginia, and she's playing great. And I think it's people are really seeing its value, especially in terms of physical development, because, two reasons. One is that it gives you an opportunity for your body to develop a little more. The facilities and the training facilities are, obviously outrageous, as nice as anything really that exists in the world. And the coaching has gotten a lot better and a lot more professionalized. And so I think there's, it's not looked at as someplace where you go and you sort of stagnate for a few years while you drink beer and go to football games.
Right.
There's probably some of that too. And I think that's probably pretty healthy rather than traveling on your own at 17 years old through sort of the backwoods of Eastern Europe to, get your brains beaten out for $1,000. So,
get hooked on line calls and unrefereed matches. You're a New York boy. Have you been paying attention to what's going on at Columbia with their men's tennis team?
Well, sure. Yeah. I've been paying attention to that for a few years.
That's amazing.
They're having, I think, that coach has really sort of built something there and built something that, will probably last. There's a great story about my friends Josh Robinson and Andrew Beaton in the Wall Street Journal yesterday about the program and about, how he was a good player on Long Island. He's a middle-aged guy around my age. He was a good player on Long Island, but, went to Columbia, but then, went into banking and finance. And I think what he has found when he eventually went back to coaching was that background in finance was really going to help him recruit. And because, it's the saying at these schools that, other places recruit you for 4 years, we recruit you for 40. And, him being able to sort of advise obviously smart kids on what their next step might be if it's not being a professional tennis player, which it probably isn't going to be, has really been a boon for the program.
Yeah, he's tremendous. His assistant played for me at Trinity and then went on to be the assistant at USC and is now the head coach at Penn. And he's going to do great things there as well.
Yeah, it's a lot of quality there.
This episode of the Wide Open Podcast is sponsored by Hydrus Performance Hydration. We all know it's important to stay hydrated during sports and physical activity, but hydration is equally important during a normal daily routine. If you experience low energy, dryness, such as eyes, mouth, or skin, or you have muscle and joint soreness, and especially if you suffer from an autoimmune condition and are on certain medications that will facilitate dehydration, your body may need more effective hydration to feel and function optimally throughout the day. Hydrus' breakthrough technology delivers water and electrolyte absorption with unrivaled speed and effectiveness for your tissues that need to restore balance and maintain function at all activity levels. Listen to your body and know you can use sugar-free Hydrus for any time throughout the day. So check out our website at hydrusedge.com. That's Hydrus, HYDRUSEDGE.com for more information about Hydrus Performance Hydration, and welcome to our new well-being hydration category. Use the code WELCOME20 for a 20% discount on your first order. So I'm interested. Do you know anything about like the NIL money for tennis? College tennis is that active, or is that something that's really not happening at the moment?
Well, it's not so much happening at the moment in terms of NIL, but I would say the big flashpoint, and your partner will know about this if he's an advisor to UNC Tennis, is that there's a woman on the UNC Tennis who has sued the NCAA because of this, I would say, argue, crazy rule that prohibits college players from accepting prize money if they qualify for the U.S. Open, which Fiona Crawley, UNC tennis player, did last year. She basically had to leave $100,000 on the table so she could play her senior year, which is just completely unfair. I mean, considering that, the football player living across the hall from her, I don't know if there's a football player living across the hall from her, but you know what I mean? Lifting weights in the same gym can, walk
he's
the
driving
basketball
a Bentley.
player.
He's driving a
Yeah,
Bentley.
he can walk down to the local car dealership and make $100,000 signing autographs on a Saturday afternoon. And here she's, earned this money through her sweat and through beating world-class players, and she can't accept it. So that's a lot. Fiona's actually not the plaintiff in the lawsuit. It's another woman named Reese Brentmeyer. So I think that's a case that is going to make its way through the courts and could potentially have a big impact on not just tennis players, but track and field athletes and other athletes who are good enough to compete in professional tournaments and competitions, during summers and off seasons. And, I don't see any reason why they shouldn't be able to collect their money.
I think that case wins, actually, because we're seeing it in every other sport. And then with the NIL money, if you have a big social media following, that's where companies want to throw money at you. I mean, Liv Dunn is a wonderful gymnast, nothing against her, but she's got the highest NIL package because she's so active on social media. And for the tennis kids and for the people that are competing in outside professional sports, that thing has to go the way of the dinosaur.
You would think so, yeah.
Yeah.
Getting back to professional tennis, you look at Alcaraz, Sinner, and the up-and-coming Tsitsipas hasn't won a Grand Slam yet, but, you realize how good the big three are and how I don't know if that could ever be duplicated. I mean, even Alcaraz, he came on like gangbusters, but he's got a tough time now. There's injuries and stuff. For those three to have, maintained and done all that for so many years is just an incredible phenomenon. I don't know. Do you ever think we could see that again, or is that something that's just probably never happen again?
I don't see three players winning 66 Grand Slams over a 20-year period again. That seems absurd. And so in terms of that dynamic, no. Do I think there'll be some really good players who, get to double digits in Grand Slams? Probably. But look, I think one thing you're seeing is it's really hard to win a Grand Slam. And they've just sort of changed. I think they've probably changed for the worse the way we look at players. McEnroe, pretty great career. I think he won 7 Grand Slams, right? So, Agassi 8, great career. People sort of look down their nose at Sampras in 14. These are outrageous performances, and they sort of skewed the scale.
So you've spent a lot of time with, I guess, Djokovic and Federer and Nadal. So what do you think?
I've actually not spent very much time with it. I've really, I sort of, in terms of my intense tennis coverage, I sort of just missed Federer. So no, I've never really spent any time with him. I would say the one of them that I know better than the others is probably Djokovic. But I get along perfectly fine with all of them.
So what do you think is a common thread that they have that separates them? Is the mental capacity, or is it just a confluence of, their skill, their drive? You think you can put your finger on it?
I mean, they have an incredible mental capacity, but they all just have these magical hands. I mean, tennis is a lot of different things, but on a certain level, I think it's billiards. It's just this. I don't know how to spin a cue ball the way Minnesota Fats did, it's just this sort of magical touch that they all seem to have. And yes, I mean, there is, and you combine that with just a real desire and, a real passion and love, not just for the game, but, for the life. It's a hard life. You're traveling all the time. It's very selfish. You're out there competing alone. But they all really love, they love that part of it too. And that makes a big, that really, I think, makes a big difference. So those, I would say, are sort of the common through lines. And, they've also they did an incredible job of having enough energy to keep their bodies in shape and they had a lot of luck and staying as healthy as they could. Rafa, not so much, but, did the best he could with what he had, which was pretty darn good. So I would say those are sort of the main things. And like I said, and just they love the life, and they love the moments that terrify all the rest of us.
Yeah. If you had two questions, who was your favorite player and who would you most like to watch play now?
Who was my favorite player? You mean like growing up?
Yeah. Who would you want? For me, it was.
I had McEnroe's poster on my wall. It's something about the hair and the headband, I guess, and the sort of rebel personality.
Yeah.
So that's how it was. That's how it was, much to my parents' chagrin. But when I was little, I loved him. In terms of somebody's game who I was like completely intoxicated with, I would say it was Agassi. It was just sort of the way he took the ball so early and sort of just, could take command of the middle of the court and just deal out from there. It was just that sort of aggressive baseline play was sort of something I'd never really seen before. But I mean, there's a lot of players who I, love to watch. I used to love to watch. I don't know that I loved to watch anyone more than Kim Clijsters. When she was at the top, again, someone with just sort of unbelievable flexibility, magical touch, incredible speed.
She was a mover.
And just, great balance. And, once she figured it out, unbelievable demeanor, just such a cool customer. And also, one of the kinder people you'll ever meet.
So, nice to see her back out there with her kids.
Yeah. So yeah. I mean, there's a lot of there's plenty of entertainment to find on the tennis court.
It's funny, like Agassi, he was one of my, favorite, watching him develop and grow. And you never thought that he would get surpassed in terms of the return of serve. He was the legendary, best return of serve. And now I think Djokovic, may have, surpassed him, or at least on that level. I mean, there's not too many.
Hunter's return was insane as well.
It's a little hard to compare across the different eras with the different technology. But they all did a pretty good job.
That's an understatement.
Yeah. It's interesting, offense sells tickets and defense wins championships to some extent. And, Djokovic, I mean, he's got all the weapons, obviously, but nobody gets more balls back in play and pressure points than he does. And you can just see how he wears people out mentally. He's like, what the hell do I have to do to win a point here? The guy neutralizes everything. His depth is so good. You must really enjoy being involved now where he's at his top.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I most admire about him, and also Rafa is so great at this too, is just that ability to hang in and know the right moment, and in a snap of a finger to turn defense into offense.
Yeah.
And just be able to, make that switch on a ball that you wouldn't expect them to do it on, but they see that opportunity. So that's what's always so mind-numbing to me, is these people, they'll be in a point and they'll think they've won the point, and by all rights they should have won the point. But somehow he's still in it, and somehow he's figures out how to gain the upper hand, and and just the sort of like the mental strength for him to do that. And you can see when he decides. It doesn't always work, but you can see the moments when he decides, I'm gonna do this, and you can hear he starts to the sound of his heaves when he hits the ball changes a little bit, and sort of the way he's moving changes a little bit. It gets like a split second faster, and so being able to watch him so much and being able to pick up on those patterns is a neat thing and very fortunate thing. I feel very fortunate to be able to do.
Do you think he's still the hands-on favorite to win the French Open, or he's struggling a little bit now, but I don't think that means too much. But what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not done betting against Djokovic. I'm not done. Sorry, I'm not ready to start betting against him. I think it was last year at the French Open where I thought that was going to be the turning point, and that Alcaraz was going to take him out pretty handily, and that didn't happen. And I think at that point I decided, well, I'll never pick against him again as long as he's walking. And I realized he lost a month later at Wimbledon, but he really shouldn't have. He missed 3 shots basically and lost the match. He should have won straight sets. He missed 2 backhand sitters in the second set tiebreaker that he doesn't miss 90 times out of 100, and he somehow missed them and let Alcaraz back in. And then even in the 5th set, he had a floater to break serve. The forehand floater to break serve, and he somehow muffed it. And I don't know, 6-8 points later, he was broken, and that was basically the match. So but then I was sure he was going to win I was pretty sure he was going to win the U.S. Open, and he did. So I'm not, and that was not very long ago. And I don't know. And look, maybe something has turned. Might have lost a little bit of desire. Sort of saw a little bit of that slip at the end of last year, especially in Italy. At the year-end finals, but which he ended up winning. But it's like I said, I'm not done picking against him, and I think I still think he's the best clay court player in the world, not named Nadal.
And now with Nadal on the slide, that's gonna. Well, it's funny. For a long time, the public, whoever that is, and why we even bother listening to the public, found it difficult to root for Djokovic. And now he has become, a favorite. He's become he's become one of the best people I've ever seen in the moment of defeat. He's so gracious, and he acts genuine. That's how you measure a person's character. He's really become much more likable.
It was really hard for him to be in the shadow of, these great gentlemen and champions, Nadal and Federer, and he didn't really know exactly how he fit into that mix. And I think he fits into it just by being himself, and it sometimes takes people a while to understand that you just be yourself, and like that's the most appealing thing. That people really like more than anything else. I think people really value authenticity, and I feel like he's pretty authentic these days.
Yeah,
I surely think so. I mean, I love him. He's been my favorite for a long time, and he was never really the crowd favorite, but he's really demonstrated that he deserves to be right there. And if he wins another one, great. If he doesn't, I still think he'll go down as one of the greatest, obviously one of the greatest ever. I just thought about, and we don't get into a lot of politics here. So what do you think about the whole thing? Was it Saudi Arabia where the year-end women's championships are going to be held, and there's controversy? So what's the latest on that? Is that happening? Is that, deal completed, or?
Yeah, the women's finals can be held in Saudi Arabia in November. It's a 3-year deal. What do I think about it? I think the world is a big and complicated place. And, do I favor many of the policies that Saudi Arabia has? No, absolutely not. A terrible record on human rights, on women's rights, on gay people. These are all sort of frightening and scary things. At the same time, I don't think it's fair for society to hold tennis players and athletes in general to a different standard than the rest of us. If Apple and Coca-Cola and any other big company is, doing business in Saudi Arabia, and putting up with, the mores of a society that doesn't share a lot of our values, then why are tennis players not supposed to be able to do that? Having said that, I do think it's a very tough position for the women to be in, because they're sort of held up as unfairly as some sort of, hypocrites, when, the men have been playing exhibitions there for years now. And the ATP last year put its next gen finals there. So, it should be as complicated for them as it is for the women. And I think it's not so fair that, we put all this on them.
With all the technology and your ability to watch things, from anywhere in the world, are you still traveling as much to events as you once were?
Yeah, I'm on the road about 100 nights a year.
Wow.
Yes. Short answer is yes.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm fortunate to work for one of the biggest news organizations in the world, and that's how we still do it. That's sort of our calling card.
Of your favorite venue of the Grand Slams, which one do you enjoy going to the most?
Well, I love the U.S. Open because I get to sleep in my own bed, and it's the place I've been going to since I was 9 years old, and it's also, I would say it's also the far and away the most diverse crowd of any tennis championship, and certainly, I don't know about tennis tournament, but certainly any tennis championship. It just has a different feel to it than the other ones. It sort of feels something like the city where it exists. And, and I'm very comfortable there.
I can see that. Did you ever come across, one of your precursors? Did you ever get to know Bud Collins?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I
He
know.
was terrific.
No, I knew him quite well, and he was a real gentleman, and helpful. Was always there to help a young journalist. And the only
You don't
thing
feel compelled to wear funny colored pants when you're out there.
not so much. I just regret not ever having a conversation with him about what it was like to coach Abby Hoffman at Brandeis University.
Oh my Lord!
I didn't know that. That's just great.
He was Abby Hoffman's tennis coach.
Bud was the best. I did a book signing, and he also had a book signing. It was at a men's clothier in Cambridge, and he was a big deal, and I didn't even belong in there. And that afternoon, he made me feel important. He was just that kind of guy.
Yeah, he was very down to earth.
I mean, that was a pretty good group back then. You had the Tony Treyberts, even Pat Summerall did a little bit of, tennis announcing. I mean, those guys were very insightful. I really enjoyed that. But my favorite, and I don't know if anyone will ever surpass him. I think the best analyst is McEnroe, hands down. And I mean, he can get a little bit much at times and get himself in a little trouble. But his analysis is just incredible. And I don't know if you spent some time with him, but he's got it going on. He really still has such good insight. I love listening to him.
I'd probably put right next to him, or maybe even a little above, his mixed doubles partner at the French Open in 1978, Mary Carrera. Yeah, who I think really sort of changed the game of tennis analysis in a way that no one else has.
Terrific. You're living the dream. I mean, most of us would walk in your shoes. I'm sure you've bumped into Leif Shiras. He's doing what you're doing, but on television, and you've earned it, and you're great at it, but you're living the dream.
I've been really, really lucky. And like I said, had parents who filled the house with books and, encouraged you to pay attention to the written word and valued it. And, said it was okay if that was what you wanted to do.
Some of the premise on this podcast is, we bring on people who've demonstrated excellence in their profession. And obviously you've done some incredible stuff. I'm an author of a couple of books and have been around and done really well. So if you were can advise, a kid coming out of college in terms of journalism, I know the landscape has really changed, and the print media is different than when you were, started out. How would you advise someone if they're really interested in journalism and which pathway they might, take in order to achieve, some good things?
Yeah, I think the most important value as a journalist is the ability to break news. There's a lot of people who can write pretty. There's a lot of people who can do good profiles and features and game stories when they're needed. But the really hard skill is to, develop sources and break news. And that's the thing that will impress, people who are looking to hire somebody. It's because nobody likes to get beat on a story. No one likes their publication to get beat. So if there's someone out there who's like breaking news and writing big stories, that's going to get noticed. And that it's really like, and I would say, you don't even have to be breaking news about the Yankees. If you want to, I think what really got me noticed when I was at the Star Ledger was I was covering high school. I thought that the best stories and the biggest story that our readers cared about and the biggest opportunity for me was to cover the crazy world of New Jersey high school sports, which is an incredibly competitive, cutthroat thing that everybody cares about. I mean, when I say everybody, like when I was covering that beat, I'd be driving to work, and Governor Cody would call me like once a week after reading my story or something like that. Because he was so into it, and he was involved. He was running the state, and he was busy, but he like had this. He was kind of a runner for high school basketball players. He sort of would oversee their recruiting a little bit in addition to, and he was so he was really into it, and football, and high school football players a little bit too. And so, like I said, I think I wrote some of my best stuff then. And so that really sort of like made a difference. And so my portfolio was, it wasn't just, I was at the Yankees game and I wrote a nice story about it.
Amazing. Wow.
All right. Well, listen, this has been very interesting. I'm so glad that, we finally were able to put this on the calendar and expose, what you've done over the years. And it's been very informative. And I know, Paul and I, are both, lovers of tennis, and you're at the creme de la creme of, tennis writers.
It's not that many of us, so it's a little bit of a tall.
Well, that's why it's easy to become the creme de la creme.
Right.
But
it's interesting, Matt. When I talked to Bruce about starting this podcast, and I had this belief that really highly successful people in all walks of life have very similar qualities or traits or work ethic or whatever it was. But one of the things that you say that so many successful people say is, I was really lucky. And I think that sense of gratitude to how doors open for you seems to be a much more common thing than I ever realized before.
Well, I think a lot of us were raised on the American, myth of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps.
Right.
But there's a lot of us that didn't have to pull as hard. And a lot of us that didn't have to pull as hard. And, and at the same time, when you did have some luck come your way, you were ready to take advantage of it. And
right.
So, right. That was I did get some opportunities, to impress some people, and I had good days on those days. And so,
Well, I've never done this before, but I'd like to ask for permission to stay in touch with you.
Please do. Yes, absolutely. Yes.
And before I let you go, I was once a runner. I would like to become, maybe a runner again. I ran like 9 marathons. And so that, I think, is, aside from your career, that's probably one of your, aside from your family, taking care of your family and stuff, running is a big part of your life. And I know you've run a lot of marathons and you've done quite well. So do you have a favorite city that you like to run in when you're traveling?
Oh, a favorite city, I do have some favorite, there are some great runs, but I can rattle off a bunch of my favorite runs, and it's not, they're not rocket science. There's, that I love the run along the pier, along the beach in Santa Monica is one of my favorites. I love the run, running along the Thames in London during Wimbledon is astonishing. At the French Open, the French Open takes place right next to the Bois de Boulogne, which is a nice park, and there's about 50 miles of trails there. So in the morning before the tennis, can be hunted down on those trails on many mornings. So yeah, it's been a really neat way to explore a lot of the cities that my work has taken me to, is just sort of going and almost getting lost for a while.
If you'd ever you have an open invitation to come up to Lake Placid and run some of those hills. We have a little place up there, and I think you would enjoy that.
Yeah, I've spent some time up there. So yeah, it's got to watch out for the bears.
Yeah. Well, you just have to be faster than the person you're jogging with.
I guess so. Right.
Well, listen, Matt, you were perfect. And thanks so much for coming on. We look forward to reading your stuff, and have a good evening. And thanks again. And
All right.
It was really enjoyable and enlightening. So have a great evening.
Thanks a lot for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it was a real honor.
Okay. Mine too.
All right, be well.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Wide Open Podcast, a Zoa Soundworks production, hosted by Paul Asiante and Bruce Huberman as themselves. The show is produced and engineered by James Pavelko. Theme song and incidental music created by Zoa Soundworks, LLC, in collaboration with Marco Guarino. Have a question, suggestion, or just want to say hello? Send us an email through our contact page at zoasoundworks.com. That's ZOASOUNDWORKS. It may be featured in a future episode. You can rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. While you're at it, go ahead and subscribe to the Wide Open Podcast. We upload a new episode every month. Look for us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you find your podcasts.